Bonjour, my name is Roland Watier. Are we recording, Kathy? Hello?
Yes, we're
Oh,
recording.
it says off air.
Don't touch things.
There we go. Bonjour again. My name again is Roland Watier. My daughter Catherine and her husband are helping me create these little vignettes about growing up in Maine in the 40s and 50s. Next month, I will be 71 years old to put things in perspective. The last episode or vignette last week, we talked about growing up in Maine with firearms and all that that entailed, at least for me. Not for every boy, obviously, but my life. So today we're going to pick up with that theme for a little bit longer to round it out and complete it. And then we're going to move on to um, a story that Matt and Kathy have been wanting me to do for a long time, the flying school bus. Okay, duck hunting. We left off when we talked about duck hunting last week, but duck hunting also took place on Merry Meeting Bay at the confluence of two great rivers, the Kennebec and another one I can't remember now. But anyway, there was this long, long breakwater that extended out for nearly a mile to keep the two rivers separate so that navigation would continue without silting in and becoming a big bog. And it was quite boggy to begin with, even with all of that. So I used to put my kayak, a beautiful kayak. I got to tell you a moment about that. So when I was a freshman in high school, the school librarian, who was in her late 80s or mid 80s, um, asked me if I would like to buy a kayak. And I said, well, I think so, sure. And she wanted me to work on her property and do gardening and that type of thing in exchange, which that was great. Because at that time, I also had about 14 other houses that I would take care of. I probably had a total of 2 miles worth of hedges and stuff that I would shape and sculpt and trim into various things. And it was fun over the years to watch them grow and fill out to what I had imagined they would be when they were right. And I also had a power lawnmower eventually, and I'd have a wagon and I'd hook it all together and I'd go down through the neighborhood from one of my clients to the next. And this is, oh gosh, I think I was probably in the seventh or eighth grade when I was doing that work. You might say my first sort of job where I was the entrepreneur. Prior to that, I had worked for different canning companies, picking beans down in Merry Meeting Bay and up in the county, and never did pick or uh, potatoes. That was grueling work and way, way up north. But squash and pumpkins and all sorts of labor, blueberry raking. Oh, you know. So I did all those jobs for those people. Then I started this little thing with the lawnmower thing that actually made me more money. So anyway, the kayak is like 14 feet long. And her husband, during the Depression, worked at a factory that made laths for boxes. And they were like a half an inch thick, made out of cedar, and maybe an inch and a half to an inch and a quarter wide. And the kayak is just a beautiful symmetrical needle from forward to stern. And at that time, it was covered with canvas. And so I would take the kayak and put it in the Kennebec and float down the Kennebec. And oftentimes, my dad, when he got off work in Bath, would pick me up at a location that we had decided that I would be at. And to float down a great river is really a Tom Sawyer experience. And I remember doing it alone repeatedly, time and time again. And whenever anybody would jump off the bridge up in Augusta, suicide type thing, Mike and I would grab a canoe and a kayak, and we would put in and see if we couldn't find the bodies. Sort of like that movie Stand By Me. And I think on one occasion, if I remember right, Mike and I did find a torso. Anyway, we would go duck hunting at Merry Meeting Bay. And I remember my senior year in high school, my dad said, you know, you're out of here. You graduate from high school, get a job, move out of the house, whatever. And it looked like the service was where I was headed because there was a draft. And I'd already I put it off too long. When I finally did go to the draft board, they gave me 1 week to pick the color of my uniform. And I chose the Navy because all the photos I saw of my dad and all of his buddies during Korea and World War II, they were in, Army green, and they were covered in mud. And then my uncle Oscar was an E6 petty officer in the Navy, a boatswain's mate. And he had the flared bell-bottom trousers and the bib and the cane work and the funny little tie that we all wore, it came out split. And the Dixie Cup hat. And every photo I ever saw of my Uncle Oscar, there were babes hanging all over him. Good-looking women. And I thought, I'm going to go in the Navy. And so when I told a recruiter that story, he said something to the effect like, I think we should send you to the intelligence school. That's the most intelligent decision I think I've ever heard. So anyway, a little bit of fun there. So back to Merry Meeting Bay. The kayak would only displace about an inch of water. So with a pole, you could pole that kayak literally across the water that remained as tension on top of the mud. And I would start at the north end, the upper end of this great long stone breakwater. And the breakwater was, 2 cars wide, perhaps, and extended up above the river, even in high water times. So it was probably 6, 7 feet high at least. And these massive boulders is what comprised it. So opening day, there were so many gunners, and back in that day, there were so many ducks too. There were ducks. The sky was full of ducks. It's like the old movies, which makes me sad because that means I'm an old movie. But I didn't even need a gun. There were so many crippled and wounded ducks. And I think the limit was 2 of this kind and 4 of that kind or something like, I can't remember now, but you could take quite a few ducks. And of course the game warden's there, but I ran the risk because for the first 3 or 4 days after opening day, there were so many crippled ducks that I could just walk down the breakwater and stick my hand in between the rocks and that type of thing and pull out wounded ducks. And then, of course, I would dispatch them and throw them in a kayak, and we'd come home with an abundance of ducks without even firing a shot. And I just thought that was probably the most honoring way that I could handle that situation. Well, during the latter part of the season, we would go duck hunting down there, and my dad and I would get out there, and we had a boat that was pretty low so we could cover it. And I remember we're standing side by side, and the idea was that when ducks came by, if I fired at them, I would turn left to try and fire at them as they passed over us if I got the opportunity. My dad would turn right, and then he could shoot at ducks flying away in the event we didn't get them. And he had been kind of giving me a hard time about, because he had this pump shotgun, and he could make that thing just pow, 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 make it work. And he'd been giving me a hard time about my double barrel shotgun and why I ought to upgrade into a. And I says, yeah, like that piece of crap thing I had, that semi-automatic in the beginning. He said, no, you need a pump, you know. So anyway, this whole group of ducks came flying right at us and right over the top of our head and past us. And I've got 2 shots, and Dad has 5 because you have a plug in there. And as the ducks come in, he shot 3, and I picked out 2, and I shot them. We turned like we had agreed, and we'd done this many times before. I broke down the double barrel shotgun, popped out the 2 shells, threw in 2 more shells, and shot 2 more as they flew away. And my dad picked up 1 more. And so I got 4, and he got 4. And he said, I don't believe it, with a double barrel, my God. So that was kind of a really interesting hunting moment between a father and a son. So that was a good day. That was a good day. So, okay, Kennebec River, kayak. There's a thing that happened to my brother Robert when he was about, now Bobby this year I think is 60 or 61. And when he was 5-ish, my dad and I were working on our house at 159 Highland Avenue, the one that my dad owned. And big gray sea captain's home, and we were painting that one particular south side that year. So a lot of scraping, a lot of prep work. Had a big wraparound porch that was all glassed in and screened in. And we were up on the roof, and Bobby came down and was walking. There was a concrete sidewalks. It was like an urban sort of setting, but the concrete sidewalks. And Bobby was on the sidewalk and walking by, and this German Shepherd came right up the street with no provocation whatsoever and grabbed him in the head and face and eye and ripped this little boy's face. Oh, it was horrible. First time I'd ever seen anything like that in my life, and it was horrible. He's screaming, and the dog won't let go of him. And we scurried down the ladders, and I jumped off the roof, chased the dog away. Dad followed it to its residence or something like that. So we knew what the dog was. Called the police. The police came by, acquired the dog, took it down to the Gardner police station, and put it in a cell. There was no pound or anything like that in those days. And my dad was furious. Bobby, of course, we had to break all that off because Bobby needed medical attention, and that was the first order of business. So when he comes back, he's all stitched up in many places, and the doc did a great job. Little tiny scars showed later in life. But when you see the cheekbone and all that, you just freak out. And my dad, it was really serious. He responded appropriately. Anyway, Dad now wants to know what the hell's going to happen to the dog. He doesn't want anybody else to get hurt. So we go down there, or we called him on the phone or something like that. And they said, well, we're going to keep the dog for so many days to make sure it doesn't have rabies, and then it goes back to its owner. And my dad said, I want the dog put down. And their response was something to the effect that, well, we can't do that. Apparently laws back in the day were different. And so my dad thought, all right, you can't do that. So he talked to Pearlie, and they hatched a plot. And the plot, quite simply, was Dad would go into the police station, and they would get to the one guy on the desk. All the other officers were out on patrol or whatever. And Pearlie would start an argument with the guy about anything, just an argument. And Dad, in the meantime, would slip back into the cell block And he pulled out a handgun and shot the dog 5 times right there in the cell. The cop was furious, came running into the cell block. What the hell are you doing? You know. And my dad said, you got a problem with this? I don't. The problem's over. The dog's dead. It'll never bite another kid. Never heard another word from the owner, from the police, anything. My dad could be a real scary guy. But you definitely wanted him on your side. Okay. The flying school bus. Wow. One of the things Pearlie did before he left Maine was he drew a little map, a sketch of Round Pond and where the bus was and all of that. And I'm going to hold it up in front of the screen just for record purposes. And I'll hold it there steady for a moment so you get an idea. And then I'm going to read from his transcript of the flying school bus, and I will insert little things that I knew about it that make it a hell of a lot more fun than the way Pearlie wrote it. But this way you'll have the full history, because there are things in the letter that I didn't really realize. Okay, so here's the map, and you'll note Round Pond, and I'm going to put my finger up here where the bus is. Okay. Now, you see, there's Northern Brook running from north to south, and the bus is right down there on Northern Brook. Now, Round Pond is down there, and this is the road out to Mac's camp right here, and that gets up on the Big Eddy, which should be down in here somewhere. So, the old sand pit was out here, and so on. So, it's just an idea. Thompson's Point's down there, I'm sorry. So, that gives you an idea. So, what happened was, and we're going to start at the beginning, because this is stuff that Kathy has not heard about before either. Pearlie says, page 1, I won't go too deep into the history of the bus, but I will explain how it came about that we bought it. Having frozen half to death on numerous times in a tent for years up there hunting in the Township 19, Roland and I said there must be a better way. Now, I recall this was, oh my God, this was way back when I'm a freshman in high school or something. Okay. At first, we thought that we could build a home, a trailer, and have like a wood stove in it and that type of thing. But then we heard about a school bus that was for sale at a church up in Augusta for about $100. Okay. Now, $100 was a lot of money back in that time. It was a lot of money. We're talking 1950s, you know. So, Vincent Roussel, Ernie McPherson, Dick Vigue, Roland, and I all chipped in and bought it. Now, it tells you how much $100 was when it takes 5 guys to chip in that have fairly decent jobs, and they chip in to buy a bus. Okay. So they buy the bus, and then Roland and I stripped it out. We put 6 bunks in, put a sink in, and a gas stove. We also had a wood stove. We begged, borrowed, and stole everything we could from the Maine National Guard. And the first year, we ran it up to Township 19. I think we used up about 18 spark plugs and 3 gallons of oil for the trip of no more than 320 miles round trip. That engine was pretty well shot. So Roland and I decided to put another engine in it. And I think that we found an engine for about $60, if I remember right. With all our problems, our partners decided to back out. So we gave them their money back, and your dad and I became the sole owners of the bus. To defray the expenses, however, we charged those guys rent and any other guys that wanted to chip in on it for any particular hunting year. Roland and I got to go hunting for absolutely nothing, gas, oil, and all. I think it was the first season, I think it was the second trip after we changed the engine that we lost a rod on the way home. Now, Vigya was driving when she began to knock, and so I took over at the wheel and nursed it all the way home at about 25 or 20 miles an hour. It took forever. We didn't want to put in any money into another engine. So Roland and I decided to lease a parcel of land up there in Township 19 and leave her there. We knew the spot we wanted, and so we contacted St. Regis at the time, and they agreed, and we got the parcel. We actually put the bus there before we got the agreement back from St. Regis, but anyway. We dropped the engine pan out, and cut off the piston rod, and left the bearing and cap in place, and clamped the shaft together. Pulled the other piston out and push rod for the valves and put it all back together, and it ran. Now it's a 6-cylinder, not an 8. Ray Bowman, Ernie McPherson, your father, and I pulled out of West Gardner one night at about 9 o'clock in the evening and headed up to Township 19, 170 miles. The engine shook like hell all the way up, so we couldn't really do much more than 17 miles an hour. Driving at night meant we didn't have to pull off the roads so much for other cars. We drove all night and got there at about daybreak the next morning. Now the fun begins. We already had had swamped out a road down into there during the hurricane. That was a hell of a job. Down from the pinnacle. Okay. Where we wanted to actually land the bus down on the riverbank. The bank from the road down was about a 15-degree drop. Right? Wait a minute. Was about. Sorry, folks. Hang with me. Yeah, 15 degrees, which we could not make from the main road. So it was decided to drive all the way down the pond road to where we could turn around and head back. And we deliberated what to do at that point. It was decided to drive down, turn around, and that way we could approach the pinnacle at a 45-degree angle from the road on the other side of the road. We dug a ditch so that we could break the bank down and she wouldn't go quite so high in the air when we first got it off the road. Hitting breakneck speeds of 15 to 17 to 20 miles an hour coming down the hill. We also, as luck would have it, there was a great big pine tree about halfway down the slope, about 40 foot high and about 2.5 feet in diameter at its base. We figured it out, all the angles and everything, and I used to be a great pool player. It was decided that if we took off just right from the road, she might go airborne a bit and we could bounce it off that tree. But now we had a few more strokes of luck. The bigger question, who was going to drive her down the hill and actually try to bank it off the big tree? Seeing as how we'd all had a few shots by this time, it was agreed that I could finish the bottle, and as courage comes in a bottle, everything was A-OK and ready to go. Everything had been taken out of the bus that could possibly harm me. Pillows were tied in front of the steering wheel. I was laced into the seat, and down we went. The bus was up on two wheels, almost ready to roll over when she finally made contact with that big pine tree. With just 5 feet to clear, she was up on two wheels, and sure in hell we thought she was going to go over sideways and sit there for the rest of her life. When she hit the tree, down she went, down, broke the axle off the front wheels, and landed nose deep in the mud from the rainstorm and the hurricane the week before. And that's where she would have sat, except we all got together and rigged up some pulleys and chains and come-alongs, and we put the wheels back underneath her and chained her together, and we winched her all the way down the other half a mile right to where she sits today, provided that there's anything left of her, what with all the years of passing. This is just one of the many episodes that I had with your dad and all of our friends when we were hunting in Maine. Love, Pearlie. So I think that's really cool to have that letter. The flying school bus. I'd heard that story so many times, and it just to see where it went off and down across there, and it was airborne when it hit that tree, and it kept it from flipping over, and down she went, and all the work that went into getting that great big old school bus down on the stream where it sits today. Okay, there was another story that I want to get in here, and it was my dad's last hunting trip. A number of years later, after having been snowed in, and when I tell you the story about being snowed in, you'll hear about a gentleman whose name is Clyde. Now, Clyde, I think, was Ernie McPherson's cousin or something like that. And his job all year long was he was a patent maker. And he made, patent making is a very, very strenuous mental and physical job that requires delicacy and finesse. And Clyde would go hunting. He had all the gear and he had the gun and all that stuff. So he would leave somewhere around Boston, I think it was, come up and join us. And he'd pay his whole fare, and he would contribute to the grub stake and all that, but he hardly ate anything. So he would mostly drink. That's what he did. And the last year, and the next to last year, I think it was, that my dad went hunting up there. I didn't go with him the very last year. But we're all sitting around the table, and I think Roussel, Vincent, he was like the cook. And when you got a guy that will cook, and other guys clean the dishes up, there's one thing you want to be sure. If he serves you moose shit pie, your reaction is, and good too. The cook does the cooking, and you appreciate it. That's the camp rule. So Vincent is serving up some food, and he gets this big cast iron fry pan all full of whatever, probably venison at that point. He probably shot a camp deer at that point. And he serves it to somebody, and somebody goes over and says, Clyde, you want some? Clyde. Goddamn, Clyde passed out. Head in the plate, empty plate. And Roussel looks under the table and goes, oh my God. Clyde had died right there. So without any further ado, it was decided that it was well after dark. Trying to get to the coroner's office or whatever would be like nuts in the middle of the night. So one of Clyde's favorite places was to take a chair, sit out on the. Now, this is not at the bus. This is at Mac McPherson's camp up at the Big Eddy. And we'd set him out there on the porch, tip him up against the backboard, put his feet up, and of course, Rigger sat in. And there sat Clyde all night. The next morning, went out. They got the coroner, and they brought the coroner back in. But here's to Clyde. Long may he rest. And until next week, this is Roland Watier saying happy trails. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Harry.